So Thor Love and Thunder's been out for a decent while now, and having seen it just last week, I gotta say, the movie kinda sucks. Now before y'all start whipping out your keyboards and making it your life's mission to cancel me, I just want to say that I was actually really looking forward to this movie. In fact, it was one of the few Marvel Phase 4 movies I actually had serious faith in and was legitimately looking forward to. And I mean, can you blame me? The movie is directed by Taika Waititi and he gave us Thor Ragnarok for crying out loud. So I assumed that we'd get the same kind of quality in Thor Love and Thunder as we did in Ragnarok, which was great. Turns out I was wrong though. Very wrong. First off, let's start off with the things I liked about the movie, and unfortunately there isn't much. As usual, Chris Hemsworth does an amazing job acting out as Thor, and although the script may not be the best, Hemsworth does well in everything that he's told to do. Some of the action is also pretty good at times, in particular the battle between Gorr, Valkyrie and the Thors on the moon was quite engaging and visually impressive. I also liked seeing the scenes where Thor and Jane teamed up and used their hammer's ability in combination with Zeus's lightning bolt to combat Gorr. That was quite fun. And just seeing Thor fighting in his prime is obviously a dub for anyone who's a Thor fan, especially since all we got to really see of Prime Thor was in the Wakanda fight in Infinity War. And although the movie didn't quite give us the same as Infinity War, I'd say it still did a good job in showcasing Thor's strength and power to audiences. The visual effects, although not great on the whole, I found them to be pretty decent when it came to Zeus's home at Omnipotent City, as the place does seem rather grand and godly as it's supposed to. And that's about it for everything I liked in this movie. Now onto the stuff I didn't like. First off, the pacing. It becomes quite apparent upon watching the first 10 minutes of this movie that the pacing is way too fast. Once you get past that opening scene with Gorr, it all feels just way too rushed. I often forget that the Guardians are even in this movie because of how rushed their scenes were, not to mention how irrelevant their very involvement was to begin with. Even when Jane became Thor, it felt too rushed. We're told she's been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, yet we're only given like 2 scenes of her in the hospital before she abruptly decides to go to New Asgard and pick up the hammer. And just like that, we have our new Thor. How incredible. And Thor's reaction when he first sees Jane as the mighty Thor is utter bullshit. He doesn't even seem that surprised or flattered like he realistically should be. And when you take into account that this is the first time he's seen her in 7 years, and she's got his old hammer which he just watched get destroyed a few years back, it gets even worse. This whole scene is just played for laughs. It's completely lacking in the emotional and psychological thoughts that should be going through both of their heads. And in general, Thor's character felt completely off the entire movie. Rather than being a mixture of the goofiness from Ragnarok and the gritty, deep and depressed character that he was in Infinity War, Thor in Love and Thunder is nothing but a complete and utter joke. He doesn't even have a single emotional or heartfelt scene like he did in any of the previous movies. The entire movie, it just feels like we're watching a goofball assemble with his other goofy friends to go play capture the children with the villain. Seriously, the entire movie is nothing but straight up goofiness and dumb jokes. And I know the MCU is all about goofiness and being funny, all the movies are like that and they have been for time now. But there becomes a point where it's simply too much to bear, and that's when you apply goofiness at the expense of character development and writing, which many of the previous movies knew better than to do so. Now you may be wondering, oh but Ragnarok was goofy as well, why do you hate this movie for being goofy but you don't hate Ragnarok? Well, there's a difference between being goofy and including deep scenes and character development than there is with purely being goofy. The difference between these two movies is that in one, Thor goes through a legitimate character arc and has several deep and emotional scenes which help develop his character, while in the other, Thor doesn't go through a single character change or arc, and instead spends the entire movie making dumb jokes while riding on 2 stupid goats. It really is a shame to see it come to this, as Thor has long been one of my favourite characters in all of Marvel, and not once during this movie did it feel like I was watching the true Thor I know from the previous movies. Jane was also a big plotline which they needed to handle well in order for this movie to work, and unfortunately it didn't really go that well. I've already talked about how her intro scene is so rushed, however even after becoming Thor, her reaction just feels so off and unrealistic in relation to how a mortal would react if they gained super strength and could fly. In fact, it's so lackluster that I dare say the comic adaptation, which is heavily criticised by fans, does it better than the movie itself, because at least there, Jane has somewhat of a more realistic reaction upon gaining Thor's powers. Now, Jane's character as a whole is honestly fine, and I didn't really mind her that much, but my main problem with her is how severely underdeveloped she was, just like with everyone else in this movie. It just feels like no one, including Thor himself, got enough screen time in order to be properly fleshed out as a character. And this brings me to the next problem, the villain. Now, Gorr isn't exactly a terrible villain, he's alright to say the most, but he certainly isn't great. My biggest problem with him, I'd say, would be his lack of development. The closest we get to a motive is a short flashback scene where he gets denied by one god who then tries to kill him. But that's about it. We aren't told exactly why the actions of one god have suddenly convinced him that every god in the cosmos now needs to die. It also turns out that his plan to kill all the gods requires using Thor's axe, Stormbreaker, to open the gates to eternity so that he can be granted his wish. Fine, but guess how he decided to lure Thor in so that he can retrieve the axe? By capturing a bunch of children and holding them captive in his spaceship. Need I say no more? Hopefully most of you have realised how ridiculous and silly of a plotline this is. It also doesn't help that Gorr is a much better villain in the comics than he is in the movies, especially considering it's usually the reverse. I also didn't like Zeus in this movie either. He just felt like a big plot device in order to get fans hyped or whatnot, but I found his personality to be really unlikable and it just wasn't for me. I was honestly thinking of giving this movie a 3 or a 4 out of 10 when I first saw it. However, I decided to be nice, and so Thor Love and Thunder gets a 5 out of 10. Honestly, the only real enjoyment I'm going to get out of this movie is more power scaling to work with, so do expect more videos covering Thor and Gorr. Look guys, I know this is probably quite unexpected coming from a channel which has content centered around everything Marvel, and this was quite a shock to me as well. I truly was expecting this movie to be a good, even a great addition to the franchise. With the MCU spiraling down recently and becoming less and less interesting, I really was counting on this movie to bring another hit for Marvel, which makes it all the more unfortunate that it just didn't work for me. If I'm being honest, the only movies or shows I've truly enjoyed in Marvel Phase 4 so far have been No Way Home, Multiverse of Madness and Moon Knight. And now with Thor down, I honestly have nothing else left to be excited for, which really is a shame. I've always been a huge fan of what the MCU has managed to accomplish in the Infinity Saga and probably always will be. However, the direction in which Marvel is currently taking their verse is something I've slowly begun to hate. Please like and subscribe for more videos, hit the notification bell and leave any suggestions down below. Thanks for watching, see ya.